And welcome you back on this springish evening to Conversations on Leadership and Administration in Childcare. My name is Nikki Byers, um, and I am here to share a little bit more of my life experience. But we're going to start as we always do. Um, I'd like to acknowledge that I am a settler on these lands now known as British Columbia that were stolen from their owners. I offer respect to the elders and to the land itself, and I'm committed to actively work towards reconciliation that is just. As someone who works alongside children, I want to offer them the truth of our history so that they may seek justice as they become full citizens of this land we know as Canada. Just a little quick reminder that we have talked a little bit about gathering intentions to just be yourself and use your voice if you're brave to do so, to listen to what is being shared and what is missing, especially by me. Notice where you find yourself pausing and want to know more. Be curious. If we get into a conversation, let's challenge the idea and not the person, to be willing to unlearn and relearn current thinking, even if you just experience discomfort, and come prepared having done the work to do the work to grow. So I hope we're okay with those. And I just always want to start by a quick revisit of our last session, which we talked about standards of practice and some other HR practices. I did share, and I think Michelle and the organization has posted an article and the standards of practice. I know several of you reached out to me for some further documents. That offer is still available if you are still looking for more information on that topic. But is there anything else? Is there anything anybody wants to revisit or mention, or did I forget to send you something? Anything anybody wants to shout out? Nope. All right. Well, let's jump into this 1 hour we have together to cover some very, very huge topics. So we're here to talk about team building and communication. And as I just said, two huge topics with many nuances and layers. So the information that I'll share today will be specific to childcare, but more general in nature. And if you have any specific questions, I'll stay online at the end of the session. And as always, my email is at the end of the presentation, and you're always welcome to reach out. So once we've finished with the content for tonight, I'll stop the recording. And then those of you who want to stay and just have a bit of a dialogue, you're welcome to stay. Does that sound good? All right. Okay. Leading teams. We're going to start with teams and then we'll move to some general stuff around communication. And so I think it has to be said that the success of any childcare organization is the performance of the team in each classroom, right? That is where the service delivery happens. If things fall apart, it is most generally because something happens in a classroom or between the educators or with the families or with a child. And so, as much as having great policies and procedures and an executive director and a board who's super supportive and all of those things, at the end of the day, what happens in those interactions in our classrooms is where we thrive or where we fail. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time and energy is to help teams that are doing the work to thrive. So if a team is struggling with communication or interpersonal issues, if there's job performance issues, it will do two things. It will take a disproportionate amount of administrative and management time and energy, and it will lead to low performance, which will ultimately affect the children, right? Because the level and quality of service delivery will suffer. And often this is where things lead to complaints from families. And so obviously as leaders, as people who are maybe managing teams, this is not where we want to be and not where we want to be spending our time. And so we're going to look at a few things about how teams develop and ways in which we can interact with teams to help optimize their performance. So this is a graphic, and we'll talk a little bit about both the leader style and focus in the next slide. But what is illustrative in this diagram is that the leader's style and the leader's focus has to change as the team is changing. It cannot be the same all the time because your focus and style will need to support the team at the moment that they find themselves in, whether it is new team, a developing team, a performing team, or whether they've been together for like ever. That brings its own. We'll talk about each of these areas of development, but what it will take from you is a deep skill set because you'll have to be able to switch. And if you have multiple teams, you may have teams that are in all different of these stages and will require a different approach from you. And then also high adaptability of you as the leader. And so few childcare managers and leaders, myself included, had access to this kind of training when we were learning how to do these jobs. Most of us have come from different professions or different jobs within the childcare sector and haven't really had management or team building or HR training. And so this is sometimes things we're learning on the job, and intuitively, you probably know a lot of this. So I hope you see yourself in this conversation as we move forward. So when we talk about style and focus from the previous slide, your leadership style will determine how you engage with people, providing motivation and commitment. Your leadership focus will help ensure you apply the right leadership style for the right situation to achieve the right results. And, you can read that. And I think all of us will understand that one paragraph, that one bullet point is speaking to a large number of skills that you need to have, as well as a lot of time and attention that it will take. While understanding how different leadership styles can be effective at different stages of team development, there is still another step that needs to be taken for you to have, and that is a clear focus based on your values, of course. I know I'm a stuck record when it comes to values, but once you have clear values that you can clearly articulate, and the more that you embed that throughout the organization, the easier this piece of work will be, because you can always fall back on your values and hold people to a standard of practice and some accountability based on values and not just based on this moment that they're in, that we're all in together. So this next graphic is a very typical team development, right? All teams start with forming, and then there's always a period of storming, right? Jockeying for position, who's in charge, who's got the most power. And then there's sort of a settling down. We call it norming. Just, people start to get into the groove and start to do well. And then when everybody's on the same page and everybody's settled, we should get to some sort of level of performing. This is where a team's at optimal performance. And then we have the stage called adjourning, which is what happens too often to us in childcare. And that is when there's a change to the team. Because every time you bring a new team member in, somebody leaves, somebody comes back, you're right back to the beginning. And we start off again with forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So this is a studied and well understood team development matrix, and we'll talk about each of these areas now. Whoop. Hmm, I've lost a slide. Okay, I'm just going to stay here and just read this slide. So sometimes because of high turnover in childcare, it can feel like you are stuck in the forming stage over and over and over again. Or if it's a well-established team, it can seem like you are stuck in the storming stage for a long time. This happens when you have two personalities working in your team that do not get along. And we all know that happens, right? We've all been in teams where there's been two people who haven't got along particularly well. And If you stay in storming for too long, you burn everybody out, including yourself, because you're constantly having to be involved, to interject, to try to get people on board with what your thinking is or what you need them to be doing. So my feeling is if you are stuck in storming, if there's just a lot of conflict on a team, my biggest well, one of my biggest flaws as a leader is that I'm always really optimistic that people will get along. And I really hope that that happens. But the truth of the matter is, the longer you leave a situation that isn't resolving despite your best efforts, the longer the pain will be. And so switching somebody out, letting somebody go, whatever it takes to get you out of storming, um, is better done sooner than later. In norming, things it happens more slowly, but it is accompanied by an ease in the workplace. There's less jockeying for position, less focus on duties, and more on the work of being with the children. So the focus now is not so much the adult relationships because those are in order, and now the focus can really be on the work that is being done with the children. Performing is a rare and beautiful moment. Sometimes we call it sort of flow, when every team member is at maximum efficiency and attitude. This stage is when there's no question about why did you do that? Who said you should do that? That's my duty. This is my shift. All of that is gone, is put to the side, and people back each other up. You're busy with something, I step in, but I don't keep a ledger of all the times that I did that. We just work together as a team to make it happen. When a team is good at this, as performing, you've got a really great team and your program and things are going really well, at some point, it can also lead to a bit of stagnation, right? Because everybody's just doing their thing. But where's the innovation? Where's the new ideas? Where's the new questions? And sometimes I see teams that have been together for a really long time, know each other very well, are like a well-oiled machine. But it can be very hard to get those folks to really step up their game, to really stay engaged in professional learning, to be open to new perspectives, etc., etc. So we have to keep an eye on that as well. And then adjourning is when a team changes. And there's two ways that people on the team will take this moment. Some people will do a happy dance. They'll be so happy that person is leaving. They will be thrilled. There will be relief. And for other people, if they were really close with that person, for whatever reason this person is leaving, there can be a real sense of loss and even some grief that this person that they've known and worked well next to each other has left, and now they feel frustrated or tired that they have to now help a new person come into their team and join their team. And so, at every single point in this cycle can lead to low morale and exhaustion at times. And so there are many big and small ways that a leader can help boost a team, can do small things to help people get to know each other. But at the end of the day, what people want most in every single one of these stages of their team is to be seen and heard. And so, in whatever ways, whether donuts is the love language of your program, or whether it's time to go for coffee together, or whatever it is, as a leader, you can use those small moments, those languages of support, of being seen and heard, to help people feel less helpless on a team and more in control of the situation, um, and being together in that situation. Does that make sense? Is everybody tracking with me? I'm just going to trust that you'll stop me if and ask me questions or say anything about that. So if you recognize any of these stages, whether you've been in them or whether you just know about them, um, I want to encourage you that as you see this red line, there is movement, right? We move. These things do happen. Things do change. I know often we get frustrated when we see a lack of change, but for the most part, teams do actually move through this full cycle. If any of you have don't have this book, From Teaching to Thinking, um, I could send you chapter two, but there is a really good chapter around team building and things that can be done. And at the end of the chapter, Margie Carter poses some really good questions, which could be a catalyst for a conversation at a staff meeting or just for yourself to do some journaling and thinking. So if you don't have the book, and I really, really encourage you to get the book and read it, but if you don't have it, I can send you chapter two. I also have a handout that I will post with this PowerPoint called The 10 Dimensions of Organizational Climate. And you can complete it for your organization or your center, but you can also use it as a tool for gauging how people are feeling. It's a very quick check to get a little snapshot on the climate of your program. You're going to want to understand where your teams are at so that you can take the appropriate skills and apply them to whatever it is that the team would need. Obviously, if you're in a multi-site, I have 13 programs in six different locations. Obviously, I can't be the person who's doing this for every team, which is why we have managers at each site. And it is them that we train around this kind of work so that they can come alongside their teams. And we have a variety of resources and tools that we could offer around that. But this will be posted for you to use as you see fit. I'm going to move to communication now. Most of us know intuitively that good communication is important in the workplace. After all, great communication removes obstacles that detract from efficiency and collaboration. But research underscores that just how critical communication really is. When asked about failures in the workplace, a Salesforce study showed that 86% of respondents cited lack of collaboration or effective communication. 86% of people said that the lack of communication or the wrongness or the miscommunication within their organization was a failure. Managers or administrators lay a critical foundation for effective communication on their team. In fact, the research shows that consistent manager-employee communication is closely connected to higher employee engagement. Managers set the tone by modeling good communication for their direct reports and create the structures and processes that facilitate effective communications within their teams. In our sector in childcare, most often, leaders or administrators are juggling multiple roles and tasks, and time to invest in effective, empathetic communication is often lost in the shuffle. We have to communicate something quickly. We're rushing between one thing and another. And it is in those moments that sometimes we don't live up to being the best leader that we would like to be because we're stretched for time and our communication suffers. And there's a string of failures that come after that. And so there isn't really anything more important than communication. Don't tell the ministry I told you that. But I too have to decide some days, right? What am I going to put my energy in to do today? And I am never sorry on the days that I'm able to put more energy into not only communication, but the content and type of communication that I'm able to do. So I'm going to offer now, while it's easy to say that communication is essential, it's not always easy to bring better communication to your team. So what do you as a manager do when your team doesn't interact well with one another? That's one issue. And what about if they're not interacting well with you as their manager? You're responsible in both cases for setting the tone, which can be really difficult and frustrating. So, we're going to go through a series of tips that any manager could leverage to improve team communication right away. So, what is good communication? We define good communication as being effective both in two ways, in the content of our communication and in the coverage of your communication. So, the content of your communication is both what you communicate and how you frame it. As a manager, you should be communicating with your direct reports about both short-term priorities and long-term development on professional and personal levels. You also need to present this information in such a way that your staff team understands and can easily take action. It's a true saying that it's not what you tell people, it's how you make them feel. And I've been guilty of this, and I have seen this done poorly, where in the rush to communicate information, I leave people feeling rushed or um, they don't have space to ask questions, or it comes out very directly. It sounds like a directive rather than a conversation about communication. And I grew up in a very direct culture, and I'm often criticized for the way that I frame something. I'm also very quick with a response. And have had the very good fortune to work with a colleague who is a very slow processor. And she's taught me so much about the value of taking a breath, of taking a moment, of not responding too quickly. And I've helped her be quicker in her responses. But I really can't say enough about that that what we communicate, but also how we communicate, is absolutely critical. And the other metric here is coverage of your communication, is both who you're communicating with and when or on what cadence, on how often. A manager should have frequent and consistent communication with all of the people who work directly for them. And coverage can manifest itself in either one-on-one meetings, team-wide meetings, or more informal interactions. So if you're managing a team, you've got 6 or 7 people, however many you have, there can't only be one way to cover off all the communication that you should be doing. Obviously, if you're in an organization maybe similar to ours, there's a requirement for 1 2 hour staff meeting once a month for people to come to. But even in that moment of having that staff meeting, um, how you set that up will determine how effective that meeting is. So, is there an agenda? Do staff have the opportunity to put things on that agenda, or is it all your agenda? Is it published ahead of time so that if there's a contentious issue coming up or something that might be triggering for someone, do they have the opportunity to see that ahead of time and know about it? Um, if the only time you're communicating the business of the organization or of the center is in a staff meeting, that's not frequent enough. The flip side is if you're trying to have one-on-one meetings all the time, that can be such a time drag on all the other things you need to get done. And typically in a one-on-one meeting, depending on how you structure it, you're going to get a lot of complaint and complaining, venting perhaps. And you have no real way, if you're not on the floor next to your team, to really understand the nuances of what is happening. And so you get yourself stuck. This has happened to me in between she said, she said, she said. And I don't really know because the stories I'm getting or the conversations we're having are very different in each of those one-on-one meetings. And then there's just the personability in the hallway when you bump into somebody and you remember that they just came back from a vacation or their mom hasn't been well or their car broke down or they just came back from vacation and you want to ask them about that. Those informal interactions, all of these things go towards the coverage of your communication. And each of them in their own way is super important. So we want to think about what, how, who, and when we are communicating to cover off both the content and coverage of our communication. One of the most effective structural ways to improve the content of communication on your team is to invest in role clarity. It helps everyone on the team to know from the beginning which content is most relevant to discuss with different team members. So it's important to remember that role clarity is not the same as a job description. A job description describes the job in a vacuum. It doesn't provide any insight into the role this person is taking within a team. It's difficult to have effective communication on your team when these fundamentals are not fully defined. So, an example of this would be that perhaps in a job description, it would say that you needed to work effectively as a team member. But that's a very typical thing you would see. What that doesn't tell a person is what is your expectation of what a good team member looks like. What are the things that a good team member would do? And also, what would they not do? And so the clearer you are, so if you were to say, one of the things that helps someone be a good team member is to greet people when they walk in the morning, right? Because there's some people who walk in and don't greet anybody and take a while to settle in. And there's other people, for instance, who, are able to walk in and greet everybody and say hello to everybody. And you want to be clear that there's an expectation and there's some clarity around what the expectation is. If you're saying that being a flexible person is an important way to be on the team, then the clarity around that would be that although we might have shift duties, we don't rigidly adhere to them. That there is some flexibility there to be able to take on somebody else's task if they're busy with something else, and then the team can continue to function. What would also not be helpful is if you are keeping score on that, right? So if you have a team member who's like, well, 3 times last week I had to do this for you, and 3 times last month you didn't do this, that is also would be providing some clarity that that is not helpful to being a good team member. So I hope this helps understand the difference between a job description and role clarity. One of the simplest ways managers can promote role clarity is to explaining to each employee what metrics will be used to define success within their role. So before you, I would hope you all have a performance evaluation annually, at least with employees. And if you're going to, if you have one, then you publish what that in performance evaluation will entail at the beginning of the year, so that people know what it is you're going to be evaluating their performance on. So we're not trying to trick people into not meeting expectations. We're trying to say, here's our expectations, and here's how we're going to be evaluating your performance. And then you have some reduction of friction and you can hold team members accountable. And role clarity actually just helps team members be much happier because people understand what their roles are. So we talked about onboarding in our last session. And one of the things we do, like you would maybe say, everybody would understand that they are to support a new team member. That's would be a job description type of activity. A role clarity one would be to say, Jessica, you are going to be in charge of helping Anne, our new employee, understand what our art practices are. And so I would like you to take that role. Everybody in the team hears this. And so everybody knows that that is Jessica's role. And everybody is clear about that. Then somebody else on the team is going to help Anne know about our policies and procedures around the health policy. And so everybody understands what their role is so that Anne isn't getting overwhelmed with everybody telling her everything, or nobody's talking to her and she never finds out anything anyway. So this is the kind of place where role clarity can also really help. So here's a fun one, embracing personal feedback. So managers should encourage their team to give feedback of their performance as a supervisor. It's the best way for you or me to get better. Soliciting, embracing, and acting upon feedback you receive will improve communication and increase morale and output. There's nothing like that feeling of being able to offer a suggestion to particularly someone who is in some sort of role of authority, have them hear you, understand you, and take action based on what you said. We all have to know if you're in any position of leadership or any kind of authority position that your employees may not initially be open to giving you constructive feedback. The major reason that people don't give their boss feedback is that they're worried that the boss will retaliate back, that they know most of us have trouble accepting negative feedback. That is from the Harvard's Business School. However, it is imperative that you try your best to solicit comments because 75% of employees say they would prefer to stay with a company or childcare center that values their opinions and addresses their concerns. We're back to what we said earlier about being seen and heard, right? And all of this points back to that all the time. This kind of feedback is not sort of a once a year thing where maybe you do a survey or send out a poll. This is constant. This is in conversation constantly. Maybe after a difficult staff meeting where you realize, maybe there was a lot of feelings and you ask, how did that go for folks? I'd love to know how this meeting went for you. And then answering with something like this. Awesome, that's a way for me to be effective. Here's how I think I'll incorporate what I'm hearing from you. We should have started the meeting 15 minutes earlier. We took too long over dinner and then the meeting dragged on late. Whatever it is, this mentality will increase the richness of your communication with every team member. This is a very typical, standard, most classic tool. If you are lucky enough to be off the floor and in an office, having an open door policy is helpful for communication. When the manager's door is open, members of his or her team can provide or request feedback, ask for advice, or share concerns. And this policy promotes a sense of transparency and openness between you and your team. However, effective open door policies do not obliterate productivity. Instead of a casual open door policy in which those squeaky wheel employees are pestering you all the time, and the timid employees don't want to disturb you, opt for setting specific office hours on your calendar. And during those hours, commit to keeping your calendar open as much as you can, listening attentively, and even consider prompting participation from people on your team by setting specific topics or asking folks to complete a quick survey. I have seen managers' time be sucked away by endless people going into their offices. During drop off and pickup, it's often parents. And during the day, it is often an employee who is the squeaky wheel or is needy in some way, which in truth has increased tremendously since COVID, in my experience. A lot of anxiety, a lot of feeling of uncertainty, low self-esteem. Families are more and more complex, including our educators' families. So one of the things we've had to help some of our managers who love to chat, they love this part of the job. They love to sit in their office and chit chat with people. But we've also seen some of them not be able to complete important tasks because of the time they're spending in conversation with people. And so we have actually had a robust conversation about when it's okay to close your door and how you do that, again, with transparency and a lot of good communication about certain days of the month when you have reports that are due or the grocery order is due or whatever it is, that it is okay to protect your time. You are not 100% available to every single staff person on your team. That will burn you out. And so, I really like this idea of a qualified open door policy. I also think for families, this is an aside, um, some families really take up a lot of this time with managers. They come in, they stay for a long time, day after day. They have multiple questions, and whilst we want to honor that and answer those questions as best we can, we also cannot become that parent's person. That sometimes we allow ourselves to become support people, social workers, family counselors, when A, we're not really trained for that, and B, having a healthy boundary around how much time family can take up is really important as well. And it actually gives your staff permission to also hold that boundary if they see you holding it. Because sometimes our staff feel overwhelmed and intimidated sometimes by parents, and they don't have as many skills perhaps as we do to be able to engage in a tough conversation. And so when they see a manager putting some boundaries around what kind of communication people can have, parents can have with them, I think it helps team members as well. If you're really committed to improving team communication, one of the best and most effective ways to do it is to embody it yourself. Employees are attuned to the actions of their supervisors and look to them as leaders of change. In fact, one study showed that only 26% of employees strongly agree that their managers actually live the values that they expect from their employees. If you don't practice what you preach, your team will pick up on it. And here, boundaries matter too. We have to be really careful of gossip and assume everything you say may be shared. Um, some of the biggest mistakes that I have seen managers make in communication is ending up too close to one person in their program and and establishing a relationship that maybe they hold the boundary professionally, but everything they're doing is giving the team member the feeling that they have some sort of special privilege or at least special access and to the manager. And that all works okay when it's working well. But when the manager has to hold a line with that particular employee, things can turn sour pretty quickly. And so I think here we really want to think about understanding, if I am going to be speaking with either a team member or a parent, I absolutely assume what I am just saying is going to be repeated. If not in the parents' WhatsApp group or on in some way, then staff are surely going to be talking about it with one another. And so I I've seen this blow up too many times where a manager, may have been on the floor in this with this team and they've been colleagues for years, and then one of them gets promoted to the manager position, and then there's this weird dynamic, And unless that is well managed, it can really be very challenging, not only for the manager and the person involved, but for the rest of the team who are witnessing that. And I highly suggest a social media policy because when managers are out with that particular staff person, don't ask me how I know this, at a hockey game, and they post that on their social media, and the rest of the team and parents can see that this person has some sort of closer relationship with the manager, it's tricky territory. In communication, this is my last point on this, it is always articulate your why. So often we just tell people, this is what we're going to be doing, this is how this is going to go. And we forget to tell them why. And in our organization, maybe the directive has come. We had a leadership team meeting this morning over breakfast. I said some things that need to happen within our organization. If that manager just goes back and says, Nikki said today that this is how this has to go, that communication is flawed right off the bat, right? Because it just comes off as, being told what to do. If that manager goes back and says, we had a conversation today at leadership meeting, and I really want to share with you why it is really important that we do X, Y, and Z. Because now the manager has taken on that. She's showing support for the organization, but she's also telling her why. We recently, our managers told us they really want to do some more work around the 100 languages of children. We're a Reggio inspired organization. They said, but we need help. We need some support. We have a person who does program support full time. That person has put together a beautiful presentation on clay, how to use clay, how to store it, how to dispose of it, how to introduce it to children. Like a beautiful, we drove miles, found the best clay and all the tools. Everybody got a kit. And even then, when we looked at the presentation, when I sat with her, it was fantastic, but it didn't say why. Why does this matter? Why is this happening? And if we don't say we heard that we talk a lot about the 100 languages, but we realize we haven't really put the tools in people's hands and that you all might want to do some exploring around the 100 languages. So here is a way that we're going to step in alongside you with some resources and some learning to help us all be better at the language of clay. If we don't articulate that, it comes again as a directive. And so the uptake and engagement will be completely different. If we walk in and say, everybody's doing clay, now this is how you blah, 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 then that's a different story, correct? Everybody understands that. So always say your why. Creating an environment where effective communication is the norm, isn't always easy, but an essential characteristic of high-performing teams. When your team is not communicating well, performance usually falls, right? Um, and so ways to understand that this is happening is if you're not in the classroom observing it, all the time, it sometimes can be, you can miss that you'll have certain team members who will only communicate with certain other team members, and they'll freeze out somebody, or they'll never speak with them, or they'll never choose to work with them. If communication starts happening through the children, so something like, Evelyn, I think you should ask Miss Jessica if she thinks it's time for us all to go outside, right? That's a super passive aggressive way of not communicating directly, right? And there may be a reason for that, but generally, if people start using the children or narrating something they wish was happening and not speaking directly, that can be an issue. If you use a communication book and the only thing that's happening is people are writing in the book and using that as a substitute for having conversations, that is a poor performing communicative team. So there's some red flags that you will come to understand, that even if it's cheery when you walk in, generally those undertones will come out if you're around or if you look for some of these red flags. Managers who constantly seek to improve their communication and set the right tone themselves create happier working environments for their employees, and deliver better business outcomes. So challenge yourself to incorporate some of these strategies in your team's routine to set the standard for great communication in your organization. And as some of you who've been here from the beginning know, there's always going to be a couple of quotes. So communication is a skill that you can learn. It's like riding a bicycle or typing. If you're willing to work at it, you can rapidly improve the quality of every part of your life. Good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity. The quality of your communication is the quality of your life. And the biggest communication problem is we don't listen to understand. We listen to reply. I am guilty as charged. I wanted to say something about this. I called it grace and mistakes. In my experience, the amount of grace that people in an organization have for one another determines the culture and the communication. Mistakes happen. People say things they regret. People have off days. We've all been there. But how we respond in these moments matters, not just as leaders, but how each person responds. Some of us are very quick to get over a moment. Other people sulk or hold the grudge, or um, we we make space for those differences. But we've really come to use the word grace with each other. And we often say grace is the grease that keeps the SRCC moving. Because if we aren't prepared to have grace with ourselves, we're probably not going to have it with someone else. And if we can show grace even in a difficult moment, I think it sets the tone, especially as a leader. Often, somebody will come to me with some bad thing that has happened, and I now, at this point in my career, I think they would all say that they were surprised at the level of grace they received when they were expecting condemnation or frustration or anger. Probably because I've used those other strategies and they've been very poorly received in the past. And so I just want to encourage you that as a leader, as somebody, start using the word grace in your communication with people. And maybe talk about it as a team, about what does it mean to have grace with another person? How can we show grace? We don't write children off because they don't get their shoes on the right feet at the first time they try. and but we can very quickly write each other off for not doing our shift duty, or you know not being good at something that somebody thinks we should be good at. And so we're all learning every day. We really try to embody this culture of we are a community that is learning and growing together. And judgment stops that learning, but grace allows for growth. So, um, there's no magic pill here. This is something we've just learned and tried over many years to get better at. And for the most part, I think we've done well with our educators. We've tried to change the way we speak with our families as well around this. I actually write a letter in September and welcome everybody. And in it, I say, we're so glad that you're here. We know you've made, this important choice for your family. Say all the right things. But I also say, I know we will disappoint you. I know there will come a moment where we won't have met the expectation that you have of us, because we live life alongside your children for many, many hours a day, 5 days a week for the most part. And life happens here. And something will happen that will make you disappointed in us. And we will be very disappointed in that moment with ourselves, and sorry for that. And we will learn from it and we will grow from it, but we ask for grace. And so I just try to set that tone right at the beginning of the year, with everybody. I would say that, some parents are truly amazing about that. But depending on the level of disappointment they have in us, not everybody's willing to offer grace right off the bat. And that's fine. That's fine. So, I always am available at that email address for any dialogue or resources or anything else that may be of service to you. But as our time sort of comes to an end here, I'm going to stop the recording. And then if anybody wants to chat or has any questions, then I will hang out here and we can chat.